856th contact. Thursday, the 27th of July, 2023, 8:42 HRS.
Hello, this is a surprise. Welcome, Ta, dear friend, and I thought you would be away for some time.
Greetings first, dear Edward, my friend. You think correctly, for I am only visiting, so to speak. For I am only, as you would say, on leave for 3 days, and I want to use them to visit you. It has become a long time for me without the conversations with you, because what the two of us have in this regard has become much more than just a conversation for me. Especially your comments regarding our conversation topics have become a value to me, which I miss very much, and will unfortunately be denied to me for a long time.
You are still absent, then?
Yes, that will be so.
After our time here, how long will that be?
It will be about 5 months.
Then that will be about the new year.
Yes, but unfortunately that cannot be helped. But in the meantime, I'm going to look into my father's annals, which raise various questions that I want to bring before you.
There is nothing wrong with that. What do you want to know?
From the annals I have read that you and my father, which I have known for a long time, and furthermore you have spoken to Quetzal about it, as he told me, have observed at various times in the future how wild animals will attack Earth's human beings, and aquatic creatures will do the same, which will claim human lives. It is also written in the annals that animals and creatures will throw themselves into abysses and thus kill themselves, sometimes even in herds, like water creatures that throw themselves onto the beaches on the shore to perish. And all this will result when the earthly population of the world exceeds its measure, whereby my father explains in his annals that he is referring to the excess and thus to overpopulation. It is also...
Yes, I remember that, and we ourselves saw a large herd of cattle in Africa throw themselves over a rock face. Wildebeest or something. Svath explained at the time that this happened because there were too many human beings, precisely where the animals were at home. So even then it was like a kind of overpopulation of human beings, which drove the animals to death, because somehow they could not cope with the mass of humanity. And the same kind of thing has happened several times since then, I know. Also with regard to aquatic life, Svath explained that various, and that is to say whole swarms and herds, would kill themselves again and again in the future all over the world by throwing themselves on the sand dunes of the beaches and dying. But this would be as a result of the waters being polluted and poisoned. He explained that especially rubbish of all kinds would drive the water creatures to death, but also poisons of all kinds that will devastatingly poison the waters. He said, according to his research, that the poisons would affect the brains of the aquatic creatures, and in some cases severely damage them, so that they would practically commit suicide, because they would realize this themselves.
You are voicing what my father also listed in the annals.
Yes, and it confirms what we have observed together as we have scoured the future.
But that is not all. For my father wrote, and this is what I want to speak to you about specifically, namely, that you also made studies concerning the foreigners and observed many things for this purpose in very ancient times, and that they not only erected very great buildings by sound vibrations, but also brought medical knowledge to earth. But these have been lost and forgotten in the course of the millennia that have passed, just as the great foreigners Horus, Dhanvantari, Thor, etc. have been. I am also very interested in what my daughter Sim-Ya-Se told me, what she did with you. How you got to know the men catch? Duronkae, Forrestal, and Area 18, as well as Gejat, Merlin and the foreigners working on Earth at that time, etc., and what they told you before the foreigners left and the Earth humans known to you were all murdered by the secret services of the USA, and I want to know a lot more from you than what I can only read in the annals. The foreigners have been around for thousands of years, and will probably also stay around, but we have always kept away from them for certain reasons, including their home worlds in this cosmos. With regard to them, the whole thing will become acutely topical in America and enlightenment will be demanded, because You together? You, Father and you, have created clarifications at very early times in the past, with regard to which I want to learn a little more from you. Especially, however, about their highly developed medicine, because as a physician I am particularly interested in this, as also in how the early foreigners taught their knowledge on Earth to those who were suitable for it. I am also interested in what is written in the annals concerning new diseases and viruses that will spread on Earth, especially in the new millennium. My daughter and Asket also told me some of the things you noticed and saw concerning the foreigners for I do not have much knowledge of that. I am also informed about what my daughter was able to find out concerning the professional photographer and expert for professional image processing who faked your slides, partly very much, others only a little, as well as that he did not do this voluntarily, but because he was forced to do so with death threats. Otherwise
In this regard, I do not want to talk openly about everything, because I also know about his son who contacted me about 4 years ago and apologized on behalf of his father for what he did at that time. This photographer told him everything before he died, so also that he was forced to do this but I do not want to say anything openly about this, because I gave my word about this so that his descendants and their family would not be suddenly attacked and harassed from some side. Besides, it is enough that my genuine photographs are denigrated worldwide by these falsifications and manipulations, and that I myself am maliciously and enviously accused of being a forger of slides, although there are witnesses to the fact that I neither know anything about slide and photo editing, nor do I have a photo laboratory anywhere. This is in addition to the fact that I have never been able to create UFO models and capture them on slides, not at all because my ex-wife would have noticed this and ratted me out, because she was watching like a prisoner's airplane and was constantly on the lookout to be able to harm me. Her mind was unfortunately set on it, which was already the case from the beginning, and the marriage in Greece was actually, and there is probably nothing more to be said about that. That was, and is the truth. But it had to be that way because it was only through that I returned to Switzerland and began to fulfill the mission. If that had not come about, as it was intended, then I would never have returned to Switzerland, because all that had been persecuting me constantly all over the world since my adolescence through the dirty and mean machinations of the sect members of They had also indoctrinated people with their hatred, stirred them up and made them shoot at me, etc. As for the new diseases and viruses that will appear in the new millennium, it is to be said that Svath and I have established in the new era that on the one hand they are diseases that have been brought in from Africa and Asia, and spread, and that Europe and the USA in particular will be affected by them, but also neighboring countries, etc. On the other hand, new diseases will appear. However, new diseases will also appear, whereby the corona rampantly spreading disease will also be the actual cause, because new types of diseases will develop from the long-term illnesses resulting from the rampant spreading disease, against which medicines will then have to be laboriously developed over a long period of time, but which will cause many deaths. New viruses will also appear, such as those that will spread very quickly through ticks, which should have been the case for some time and should be the case now, but I have not heard anything about this yet. Other pathogens, viruses and parasites, etc., which infect human beings and animals as well as vegetables, herbs, trees, and other plants, have already been introduced into Europe or are on their way. In all of this, tourism to foreign countries, but especially the import of goods of all kinds from all over the world, plays a decisive role in the introduction. The introduction of new diseases, viruses, insects and parasites, etc., is all the more prevalent, the greater the overpopulation, which is fundamentally responsible for the importation of goods from foreign countries, the flourishing of tourism around the world, and the many harmful introductions. This is in addition to the fact that the massive overpopulation and its machinations are solely to blame for the fact that the planet Earth has now been exploited to such an extent in terms of its resources that a planetary instability has arisen, and the planet itself is no longer quite 100 in its course. This, however, is concealed from humanity, as is also the fact that due to overpopulation, which today amounts to almost 10 billion human beings, but which is minimized by around 2 billion through false calculations. As otherwise, the planet Earth truly cannot carry more than 530 million and feed them without problems. The world is slowly but surely being completely destroyed. Already all ecosystems are so battered, nature is broken, many species of animals and other self-moving creatures, as well as plants and trees of all kinds and species, are extinct that they will never find their way back to life. Due to the criminal machinations in connection with overpopulation, not only have the waters all been poisoned and contaminated with rubbish, mainly with plastics of all kinds, but the vital atmosphere has also been impregnated with poisons of which scientists have not yet even had a clue. These, however, contributed a great deal to the warming of the climate and triggered a climate change that cannot be brought under control by human beings. In addition, severe weather will occur in a more severe process in the future, and the weather patterns of cold and heat will also change in such a way that in the future there will be a great deal of disaster that cannot be stopped by human beings. Not only is the ice of the poles and glaciers melting more and more rapidly all over the world, but this is causing the waters of the oceans to rise, flooding whole islands, beaches, and mainland, and becoming an extension of the sea. So the masses of global ice will cause sea levels to rise, and in the worst process, this rise will be over 9 meters. But enough of that, because every word of warning is thrown to the wind by the Earthlings anyway, with mainly the scientists and rulers as well as their supporters from the populations denying everything, and Batzlin Lippelursch note contradictory fools, and calling it exuberant. And while I am at it, to call the bulk of the Earthlings in their rotten personality, then it belongs to me to say that this bulk, who take all admonitions as if they were simply spoken into the desert, are Earthling elements whom I can only call silt catchers. In the same way, however, are those dishonest rulers and the political parties who spasmodically do everything to destroy, cry out, and put out of power other and righteous rulers or political parties, also private elements with their ambitions. An unfair thing, as is the order of the day in Germany, for example, by making a pig of the so-called AfD, and in this process also indoctrinating part of the population, creating hatred, stirring up enmity and revenge and...
What is this AfD?
This one, not this one, because it is a political party, a right-wing populist political party in Germany, which the rest of the ruling Nazi-affiliated parties, which are pro-America and pro-EU dictatorship, as you said yourself, call right-wing extremists. The AfD party was founded in 2013 and is EU dictatorship skeptical, as well as right-wing liberal, which of course does not suit the other parties. We have something similar here in Switzerland, but never even close to the same scale. Our government corresponds to the system of a concordance democracy, which is composed of members of right-wing, left-wing, and center parties, that is to say 1. The SVP, that is to say the Swiss People's Party right-wing conservative, 2. The FDP, that is to say the Free Democratic Party right-wing liberal, then 3. The SP, that is to say the Social Democrats right-wing liberal, the SP or Social Democratic Party left-wing, 4. The GPS or Green Party of Switzerland left-wing, as well as 5. The Center Party CVP or Christian Democratic People's Party in combination with the BDP or Civil Democratic Party, 7. The GLP or Green Liberal Party Center, then 8. The EVP or Evangelical People's Party Center. In addition to the above-mentioned parties, there is also the PDA, that is to say Party of Labor, as well as the right-wing conservative Lega, that is to say Lega dei Ticinesi, and also the EDU, that is to say Federal Democratic Union, whose activities I do not know exactly, however, because I am not involved enough in politics, namely only just enough to be somewhat oriented about what is going on and running.
Good. But what do you say with regard to the Swiss people and the way they behave internally, as well as with regard to the value of the state and its correctness in terms of real freedom?
What I think is important to say is this. Switzerland has a separation of state and religion, which are really fundamental values for the Swiss. But in this regard, there is an injustice that non-religious people, such as communities, societies, organizations, and associations, etc., have to pay church taxes, such as our association FIGU. And this is more than just injustice, but coercion for something that is unacceptable and also criminal. With regard to the Swiss, they normally have an extremely pronounced understanding of democracy, and moreover, they are freedom-loving human beings and Western European-oriented. This, however, sets them far apart in this respect from the rest of the world and its politics, as well as from the mentality of other populations, such as the majority of the U.S. people. Tolerance and the separation of state and religion really are extremely fundamental values for the Swiss. Unfortunately, however, there are also human beings in Switzerland who do not appreciate these values, and who can be called traitors to the country with a good conscience, such as those who betray our time-honored neutrality, which actually dates back to the Congress of Vienna in 1814, 1815, and was enshrined in the Treaty of Paris. Something, however, that probably took root as early as 1515 at the Battle of Marignano, namely when Switzerland began to refrain from any military actions and disputes after the defeat in battle. Then, in October 1907, in the so-called Hague Agreement, the rights and obligations regarding neutrality were laid down in writing for the first time, after which everything was finally settled on the 13th of February, 1920. Now, however, the Federal Council, with its decision of the 28th of February 2022, has taken over the EU sanctions against Russia and applied them against Russia, thereby abandoning Switzerland's neutrality. According to your statements, this illogical action not only changed Switzerland's neutrality, but even seriously violated it, because everything changed with the adoption of the EU dictatorship sanctions and their application against Russia. You say that neutrality means absolute neutrality, and may in no way be changed by any circumstances and thus not violated. But if it is done out of a totally irresponsible and inexcusable illogical thinking, which absolutely indicates that the person is not capable of logical, rational, or responsible thinking, because neutrality cannot be bent, broken, and changed in any process according to circumstances or ways of thinking.
What you say is perfectly correct. In this respect, the value of neutrality has also existed with us for more than 50,000 years, namely with the term ephanekratun, and I was already taught more than 6 years ago, as a result of a return journey to the time of the Urartesher, that they already expressed through the word bain ge, that as good as an inviolable state of non-interference in any affairs of other human beings or countries, that is to say, states, was given. According to the understanding of today's languages and senses of Earth humans, this was nothing other than the meaning of the term neutrality, which meant that this was to be observed under all circumstances and must never be broken by any situations, circumstances, constellations, facts, or circumstances of the case, etc. The term bain-ge therefore meant that through the use of the word neutrality, a state of non-interference in any affairs of other people or countries or states was given. The term also meant that the Swiss government was never allowed to adopt sanctions from the EU, let alone use them against Russia. From time immemorial, therefore, it was only ever permitted to maintain neutrality, but never to interfere in any process in the affairs of other states or in those of private human beings. This would be the case if such interference would result in any kind of assistance to the advantage of one party, or in punitive measures by another party, etc. So neutrality from time immemorial means that it must be preserved under all circumstances, and that really nothing must ever be done in any process that could even slightly violate it. Neutral has really and truly meant neutrality since time immemorial, and only the slightest action or thought in the form of anything other than remaining absolutely neutral in every conceivable process and maintaining neutrality would be a breach of neutrality, which would be totally against logic, reason, rationality, and every sense of responsibility, and consequently against every feeling in this regard, deviant and reprehensible.
In other words, this would be or is a sign that the human being in question who is doing this, just violating or breaking neutrality, is not educated and is incapable of standing up for it and upholding it. Not to mention that such people do not belong in a government, as apparently neither do our federal counselors, who have taken over sanctions from the EU dictatorship and applied them in a biased manner against Russia. Putin as well as Zelensky are waging war in Ukraine. That is a fact, just as war, like any war, is wrong, murderous and destructive. But the fact that the federal counselors are interfering in it by taking over sanctions in a partisan manner and applying them in a partisan manner against Russia, thereby making a pig of Switzerland's neutrality, really takes the biscuit. And such people certainly do not belong in a government. But back to what you asked. Apart from the aforementioned unfit people in the national government, Switzerland has little trouble with the diversity of parties, because there is nevertheless great tolerance in politics. And so, even if there is some wrangling and agitation against the SVP here and there. So there is no comparison to be made with what the Nazi-like parties, as you call them, are doing in Germany against the AfD. But enough of that now. Despite everything that happened earlier, namely that Svath already told me when I was still a boy what would happen in my life, so that I knew what was coming, I had to think deeply about everything after I married my ex in Greece, in Corinthos, and then returned to Switzerland. But there is nothing more to be said about that. However, what relates to the background of things and truths concerning the foreigners, as well as concerning the unpacking and real truth of those earthlings who were under the oath of secrecy of the effective truth, but broke this oath towards Svath and me, as well as towards Semjase, Asket, and Quetzal, is something that typically shows the depravity of certain earthlings. This is because practically all those we visited unexpectedly and suddenly were murdered by Secret Service agents. Unfortunately, on Earth, it is the case with certain people that the knowledge and the word of the knowledge of secret things, when let out, leads to the persecution and killing and murdering of those who do not keep silent, or about whom alone there is the possibility that they will speak sooner or later. In the Earthling, knowledge alone, but also a suspicion about something, leads to hatred, slander, persecution, murder, and manslaughter, and destruction. There have been many reports and countless examples of this since time immemorial, which have not only led to hatred, war, and destruction, for example through presumptions or stories concerning fertile countries. Countries where supposedly milk and honey flow, gold fever, knowledge of the effective truth, knowledge of secrets, knowledge concerning the value of herbs, which for example became witchcraft mania and cost X thousands of human lives, who were put to death by torture, drowning, stabbing to death, hanging, quartering and burning, etc. Knowledge is dangerous for the human beings of the earth, for if a human being knows something true and has true knowledge of any kind, he will be persecuted and possibly killed. Thus, however, hatred arises against every human being who knows something true, whereby he is persecuted and possibly even killed and murdered for it. Therefore, every human being on earth lives in danger of his life if he reveals his knowledge in any process, for his fellow human beings have their eyes and ears open, and depending on what their thoughts and aspirations are, their reaction will be positive or negative. But now to what you asked me. I can talk to you about many things you have asked and said, and I can tell you all kinds of things and explain them to you, but I am not allowed to do so officially. This is because I would have to say too much or I could talk out of turn. And on the other hand, because I have promised Svath as well as Semjase, Asket, and Quetzal that I would officially keep my mouth shut and never talk about it publicly, and I keep to this under all circumstances. Admittedly, I have not taken an oath, which I would also never do, because I find such a thing idiotic, because for me a given word is a word that has to correspond to the truth, and that has to be kept. But all those I met with Svath, Semjase, Asket, and also Quetzal did not do that, despite the oath, and they were usually deeply shocked when we stood before them so suddenly, and so to speak from nowhere, and they had to understand that actually only extraterrestrial technology made this possible, and that my companions were in each case effectively not Earth's humanity, but came from the depths of space. But now, dear friend, before I tell you some of the things I have experienced and seen with Svath, Semjase, Asket, and recently also with Quetzal, Florina, and Bermunda, etc., I would like to submit the following to you, and know what you have to say about it. This is something that I have been compiling and commenting on for the last few days, and I think it is important that something be said and clarified about it. 81% of the exports of grain, corn, barley, as well as sunflower oil and other foodstuffs that have been exported from Ukraine since about a year ago went to wealthy countries alone that have enough money to pay for the import of goods from Ukraine. This was 17% exports to below-average income countries, with only 3% going to poor low-income countries that could just about pay for the goods supplied to them by Ukraine, and also other states and corporations, while all other poor states lost out because they did not and do not have the money. This is how the so-called world hunger relief is really handled, as a result of which the really poor in all other countries that are effectively poor can die of hunger, whereas the hunger relief organizations do not lift a finger to put an end to this misery, because in reality they only collect donations, from which they can legally fork out about 40% for themselves, their livelihood and activities, etc., but this is done dishonestly. The singer's politeness is silent about this. But, and this must also be said, billions upon billions of euros and dollars, etc., are transferred to poor countries for the military and for armament, just as military from the USA, Germany, and NATO, etc., are stationed there, which in turn costs billions that could be used against hunger in third world countries and could alleviate the famine and avoid many deaths. The whole misbehavior also shows how the government and the rich in Ukraine are really greedy for money and wealth, like other states, of course, but which have no grain, etc. to give, and that they have no sense whatsoever to help the poor countries and their populations. For the sake of filthy lucre, they simply let them die helplessly. Most exports from Ukraine have been going to wealthy countries for the past year, as usual, because poor countries do not have the money to pay for the goods. China is at the top of the list of recipients of export goods from Ukraine, namely with about 5 million tons. That the otherwise already rich, as well as Ukraine's rich exporters, are only raking in masses of money to become even richer is obvious. And my list, which I have drawn up according to the data of the UN Black Sea Grain Initiative, should clearly show how this works. My list shows with the star marking approximately the ratio of deliveries in terms of tonnage. China 5 million tons in 1 year, of the decrease in deliveries of grain, etc. from Ukraine to the various recipient states. The populations of the other countries, which suffer from severe hunger and need, and therefore have to mourn many deaths, are as a rule completely excluded from the deliveries, obviously because these are such poor countries that they cannot pay for the expensive exports of Ukraine, as of other states. The real scandal is clearly in the public reporting, as much of the media is bought and only reports what they are told by governments regarding world hunger. Russia is blamed for world hunger because it attacked Ukraine and is waging war, while the USA's rotten export behavior with food is never mentioned. As usual, only the Russians are the incarnation of evil, while Zelensky in Ukraine and the arms suppliers and all their supporters, as well as all the war supporters, are the good guys. But the truth is that of all people, the arms suppliers to Ukraine, some 50 states, and their supporters, as well as all those who support the war in the first place, are the incarnation of evil. In truth, they are the ones who are contributing to a strange world war burning in Ukraine, allowing a warmonger named Zelensky to indulge his warmongering addiction, and a war disposer named Putin to also surrender to his war ambitions. All the arms suppliers and their supporters and partisans are to blame for the fact that the war can continue for so long, and human beings are being murdered, as well as immense destruction being caused. This, while in the background America and its government and shadow government pull their strings and control everything to finally make their hegemonistic plans come true. It would be correct if all the stupid opponents, if they want strife, war, murder, and destruction because they are insane, hateful and vindictive, because they are not capable of thinking in a completely normal and correct way, but are religious believers and worldly thinkers and only indulge in the lust for power. Then they should smash their own skulls. That is how the mad presidents Putin, Zelensky, Biden, and all the gangs of their supporters and the American shadow government should fight with each other, wielding swords and hitting each other with machine guns, tanks, missiles, and bombs. This instead of the military waging war, committing murder by the meter, torture and rape, creating immense hardship and roaring misery, as well as endless destruction. if all the idiots who cause wars, and also all the like-minded people, and in general all the brainless people who take part and approve of everything, had to stick their own skulls in and let themselves be beaten up, and really only these among themselves, then there would at least be no wars in this respect, and also no distress, no misery, as well as no rapes, no torture, and no destruction, etc. But this does not seem to work with the peoples, because they prefer to get involved and murder themselves. The majority of them are so stupid and unthinking that they do not elect healthy and righteous, honest and not power-hungry persons to the government, but unfit, selfish, power-hungry and other idiots whom they elevate to government offices as rulers and government forces. This is always done finely according to the principle. The cow chooses its own butcher. While the truth is that Ukraine was attacked by Russia, the question is, where is the intelligentum, logic, reason and sanity of the Western rulers and their supporters from the people? They are all so stupid that they do not understand that they are accomplices in a strange world war that America is secretly and deceitfully waging in Ukraine for the sake of its hegemony, with NATO still involved, for which America is truly secretly wielding the scepter. But the stupid of the world unfortunately do not die out, so neither do the similarly stupefied listeners who listen to the stupid of those non-thinking rulers who wrap the stupid of the population around their fingers with fanciful lies, and who believe the lies and then fall prey to those who indulge in power and who are America's followers. Well, there is something else to say, namely that Ukraine has become and remained a victim of geopolitical interests since Hitler's war from 1939 to 1945, and the latter because America wants NATO to contract the country and thus move closer to Russia. And this is exactly why America provoked Russia to such an extent that Putin launched a war of aggression on 2022, which however was not correct and ill-considered, and is such that it will never bring, as every war only brings disaster, hardship, misery, death and destruction, what would correspond to correctness. The biggest fools in this are the partisan, America-friendly and idiot-thinking heads of countries and their supporters from the respective peoples of various states, who supply money and weapons etc. to Zelensky, as is also done by certain sides to Putin, even when this is denied, resulting in the effective fact that the war carnage, the murder and destruction, the misery and misery, continue. This will continue until the partisanship of the idiotic rulers and the equally idiotic sections of the population who are crying along with them, the supplying of weapons, the donating of money and any other help, as well as the two wartime leaders, Putin and Zelensky, finally put an end to the whole war madness, which America, in its delusion of hegemony, is leading and determining in the background. Something that is as clear and conscious to all human beings who are capable of logic and reason in their real and free of any religious thinking, as also free of any opinion, but knowing, as it is incontrovertibly the reality and truth. But back to world hunger. Data from the Food and Agriculture Organization FAO say that the implementation of its initiative has helped to reduce global food and grain prices for several consecutive months since it was signed in the month of July 2022. But the war in Ukraine has proved the opposite. So one more lie fed to the gullible human beings. Although the bulk of Ukraine's exports do not go to the poorest countries, but are unconscionably and profit-mindedly bartered away only to rich states, the whole thing nevertheless helps to alleviate hunger and malnutrition in these rich states. The latest UN report says, exports to any country help to calm markets and limit food price inflation. However, the fact that this does not mention those countries where millions of human beings are dying of hunger is not mentioned at all or only in passing, which, however, reassures that part of world public opinion that is somewhat concerned about the hunger-suffering countries. In all this, it is also claimed that the more exports of food and goods of all kinds would take place, the less food prices etc. would rise in the poor countries. This is an unparalleled lie, because in recent months I have met human beings in really poor countries and heard from them that with their meager income, assuming they have one at all, which is not only questionable but actually the case for many, they cannot even buy the most basic necessities and have to go hungry because everything has become so expensive that it is no longer affordable for them to buy. Truth is also, and this should be mentioned in particular, that namely not only the Western countries, At least they're really helpful human beings, who effectively not only with big words and donations which are often used questionably, but also Russia prevents a lot of misery in poor countries because it exports grain shipments etc. to poor countries, thus preventing hunger and starvation deaths. This, however, is officially kept quiet in the public media, such as television and newspapers, because Russia is only supposed to be demonized, shouted down and declared an enemy worldwide, while the deceitful, mean, war-conquering and hegemonic delusional America is hailed high in the sky. Of course, there are also human beings in America who do a lot for the inhabitants of poor countries and against their hunger. But there are also many human beings who are real thinking, and do not think and act like the false rulers and power-hungry people, and those who advocate this. But there again, the wrongdoers of America's rulers are power-hungry and overpowering, against which the righteous cannot defend themselves. Otherwise they will simply be dragged before the court and sentenced to life imprisonment or shot down. The power-hungry and all those who are stupid in government have their own well-being and personal wealth at the forefront of their interest, often through corruption or other crooked and criminal enrichment, whereby they top up their otherwise already highly overpaid salaries. And that such elements, of course, it must be noted that this does not refer to and mean the righteous and honest of those in power, but those who are in power are not the ones who are in power. And the fact that such elements, of course it must be noted that this does not refer to the righteous and honest of those in power, but only to the wrongdoers, allow themselves to act in a way that is contrary to decency, humanity, and the law and are not held legally accountable for it, but for which any normal citizen would be punished, is part of the daily routine. As an example, the criminal actions of former President Trump in America, who was treated with kid gloves and praised instead of punished for his criminal actions. All such unjust riffraff, and these unjust riffraff of the rulers of all countries may well be called so. And besides, effectively only the unjust are addressed by this, who must know themselves whether they belong to this sort, and therefore want to revolt against me and what I say and disclose, thus proving that they are effectively unjust riffraff. Simply do not belong in a national government and should be neither elected nor tolerated by any people, but summarily deposed. All these riffraff care only about their rule, their might and their wealth, but not about the welfare of the human beings of the earth. This is also true of the ruler Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey, who has done a lot for the country's prosperity and for his own people. But the question is what price the people had to pay for it. This is also the question regarding the machinations of America, which drove Persia, that is to say Iran and Cuba, through idiotic measures and sanctions to switch to the camp of hostility, as it happened in Switzerland on its own initiative, since in the head ill-disposed high rulers, who really do not belong in government, took over sanctions from the EU dictatorship and applied them against Russia, thus not only making a pig of the country's neutrality, but also making Russia an enemy of Switzerland. This is in addition to the fact that many foreign countries that were friendly and well-meaning towards Switzerland, that is to say their governments and populations, have lost their respect for Switzerland, as a result of which they now assess and judge the country in such a way that distrust and fear of Switzerland prevail. Well, not all peoples of the earth can obtain the food they need from the soil of their homeland alone, because in many places the soil is not fertile enough to produce enough nutrients for the plants. But it is in these so-called poor third-world countries that the overpopulation of earthly humanity is particularly noticeable, because its excess causes many deaths through rampant hunger alone. This is in contrast to the fact that in the so-called civilized world there is enough and even an abundance of food and thus enough to eat for all human beings, and with regard to their overpopulation. However, envy, enmity, quarrels, alcohol, religion and hatred, anti-Semitism, racial hatred, lust for power and domination are constantly blazing forth among the rulers, who tyrannize the people with new laws and regulations, etc. As a result, the people of the so-called civilized world are not able to eat. As a result, the human beings of the so-called civilized countries are no longer free, but are more and more browbeaten by laws, ordinances, regulations, paragraphs, decrees, and starting with the basic laws: citizenship laws, immigration laws, social laws, criminal laws, road traffic regulations, residence laws, asylum laws, federal laws, federal law ordinances, legal ordinances, regulations, guidelines, trade laws, administrative laws, factual laws, parliamentary laws, objection laws, building laws, mediation laws, equality laws, freedom laws, bathing laws, religion laws, food laws, human dignity laws, contract laws and conduct laws, instruction and press laws, opinion laws, belief laws, housing laws, property laws, association laws, assembly laws, pavement laws, etc., and much more in 1,000 other forms. If we look at small Switzerland alone, we come across a veritable flood of laws, directives, and ordinances that take our breath away. For example, there are about 300 tangible laws alone. In Italy, for example, there are a crazy 18,000 and about 3,000 ordinances and directives that have so bogged down the Swiss people that they would no longer let them lie down and sleep if they only knew about these few of all of them, which are actually, if I am correctly informed, devised, passed, and put into effect by the parliamentarians of the Confederation and the cantons, if there is not first a ballot for them by the people. However, the above is by far not all, because in every country there are also thousands of regulations, directives, and ordinances, etc., which make the lives of human beings completely unfree. And all these regulations specify how the elements laid down in a law and in ordinances, etc., must be implemented, that is to say, enforced in concrete terms. Now, greed for money, sex mania, prostitution, corruption, and many murders, war mania, skirmishes, and many other things, with criminality and crime and addictions of all kinds becoming more and more prevalent, are evils that are becoming more and more rampant in the overpopulation of the so-called civilized world, and have already become as confusing and blatant as the mass of overpopulation itself. This is destroying not only planet Earth itself through the exploitation of its Earth resources, but also all ecosystems and all of nature and its fauna and flora, and all through machinations to enjoy life without hesitation. Through the machinations to preserve and expand as well as to satisfy the human beings of overpopulation, everything and anything of planet Earth has been and is still being exploited without hesitation, such as the Earth's resources, nature and its fauna and flora, the soil, the fields, meadows and forests, as well as the moors, swamps, mountains and waters, but also the rainforests and deserts of all kinds, the atmosphere and the climate. And with the idiotic demonstrations for the alleged protection of the environment, more and more damage has been and is being done than they bring benefit. In particular, the emerging damage is caused by the fact that, as a result of the demonstrations, the stupid and dim-witted governments pass new laws, regulations and directives that not only cause more harm than good, but also endanger all order, the safety of peoples, game, animals, and the whole of nature, as well as nature itself, the atmosphere and the climate, and the human beings, that is to say the whole of humanity, and even endanger their lives and existence, and even drive humanity to the brink of extinction. In a smaller process, it has often happened in this way in ancient times in the distant past. Only at that time it was not the whole Earth's humanity, but it was only whole peoples and cities.
What is further to be done you should address in relation to what you have said, for what all you have said you should bring up to date and complete. Other things should also be completed, whereby I want to expand and change the following information page, so that you can also use it as an enclosure for book shipments, and also otherwise usefully informative. In doing so, I will be helpful and call you that as I have put it together in my mind, as follows.
That is also done, but time has flown by, and I still have a few things I would like to discuss with you before you have to leave again. Here, for example, I received the following via Bernadette from Ukraine, which you should read.
Cosmic Music by Oleg Kanash, Ukraine.
The idea that the universe is mysteriously connected to music is by no means new. It dates back to the Pythagoreans in ancient Greece, who first formulated this idea. Since then, various scientists and philosophers have tried to find a connection between these, at first sight, different fields of knowledge. But the question arises, does such a connection actually exist? Music plays an important role in our lives. It touches us and moves our innermost being. So why should not it also play an important role in the fundamental laws of nature? I am very interested in this topic, and in this article I would like to present my attempts to connect these two concepts. The first very good indication of where we should start looking is found in the Ask It contact reports. In one of them she says the following about mathematics. The elementary formulae rest in the mathematically most important numbers 3, 7, and 12. All calculations in these 3 digits always and all the time give one and the same result in the equation itself. And the equation is a perfect round which can be calculated infallibly in multiples of 7x7. All mathematics rests in a closed ring that can be calculated at any time by the numbers 3, 7, 12, and 7x7, since the primordial is itself a perfect roundness, perfect to the smallest degree, a roundness of the relatively perfect in mastery of the becoming and passing away in the creation itself. The best-known simultaneous use of the numbers 3, 7, 12 is found in music. A piano, for example, consists of 7 octaves, each with 12 semitones. An octave is in turn composed of 7 white C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and 5 black D, E, G, A, B keys. In medieval music, only chords consisting of octaves, 12 semitones, and pure fifths, 7 semitones, were considered harmonious. The pure fifth played a central role in medieval music mainly because of the simplicity of its harmonic relationship. The perfect fifth is one of the simplest and most consonant intervals in music, surpassed only by the octave and the unison. It can be defined as the distance between 2 notes, encompassing 7 semitones if you pass the keys of a piano to the right, or 5 semitones if you pass them in the opposite direction, to the left. For example, the interval from C to the next G is a perfect fifth. From a harmonic point of view, the pure fifth is important because it is based on the ratio 3, 2 in the harmonic series. This simple ratio is very pleasing to the human ear, which has led to its extensive use in music history. But one question remains open. Where is this circle that Ask It spoke of? It turns out that it is quite easy to see. It has been in front of us all along, yet no one has ever paid attention to it. Figure 1 shows the famous circle of fifths with 12 semitones, which plays an important role in the composition of music. The adjacent notes in this circle harmonize with each other to the maximum, so that they blend seamlessly into each other without creating abrupt changes. If we were to change from one note to the next while composing, without any connection between them, such music would be unpleasant to our ears. This is why the circle of fifths is so important, because it allows the transition between notes to be as smooth as possible, seamlessly linking the notes together to create a sense of harmony. The interval of fifths, along with the octave and unison, is one of the most harmonious intervals in music. If one wishes to express harmony, joy, and happiness in music, it is precisely these intervals that should be used. While for the representation of disharmony, sadness, tragedy, less harmonic intervals are better suited.
Figure 1. The circle of fifths.
In Figure 1, we can see not only the notes, but also corresponding numbers associated with the notes. The notes are numbered in order of increasing frequencies. Note A has the lowest frequency and begins with 1. In different octaves, it has different frequencies, viz. A0 =, 27.5 Hz A1, =, 55 Hz A2, =, 110 Hz A3, =, 220 Hz A4, =, 440 Hz. Then follows the note B with the number 2 and the note B with the number 3, and so on. If we look at the numbers in the circle of fifths, we see something amazing. If we go from the second digit of the note G11 to the second digit of the note G10, we get the sequence of numbers 1, 6, 1, 8, 3, 0. This is nothing other than the golden ratio, with the only difference that the last two numbers 3, 0 are reversed. 1 plus 5. 2 equal sign 1.61803. This becomes even more obvious if we continue the clockwise movement. Then we see 1.5. 2, which again are the numbers of the golden ratio. If we go from the note A12 to B2, we get the number sequence 1, 2, 7, 2, which is basically the repetition of the right part of the circle in square form. 1.61803 equal sign 1.2720. Something very interesting happens when you divide the number 4 in the upper part of the circle by the harmonic sequences on the left and right. 4. 1.61803 equals 4 divided 1.2720 equal sign 3.14460. The famous circular number seems to come out of nowhere. First mention of it is in Contact Report 260. And that is already 25 years ago. But here some readers might disagree and say that this is not the case because the known circular number looks quite different. There should surely be a mistake here. And it is here that we come to an important point, that which distinguishes our mathematics from the one Ascot was talking about. In our science, the term harmony is even missing. This exists in music, art, and literature, but not in mathematics. In other words, our science is not harmonious. It is only suitable for describing gross matter and is therefore completely materialistic. It is a reflection of our way of thinking and understanding of nature. With such a science as ours, it is simply impossible to describe fine energies, fine matters, or immaterial forms of existence. And it is therefore completely irrelevant how beautiful and elegant the theories our scientists constantly invent are. They inevitably remain materialistic, without any chance of transcending their limits. The only thing we can do in such a situation is to think anew, see anew, and then calculate anew. For example, how can we understand the nature of the indwelling spirit, note creation energy, in every human being that is constantly reincarnating? Reincarnation also works according to certain laws and can be described mathematically. Or how can we understand the nature of space and time, which are not completely material? From the point of view of our science, all these things belong to the realm of the impossible. Another interesting method of calculating the number is based on multiplying all the numbers of the circle of fifths, with a single exception. The sequence of numbers 5, 1, 0, 3 is replaced by 5, 13. This logic can also be seen in nature, especially in plants. Plant leaves grow in such a way that they maximize the amount of sunlight they capture. To achieve this, the leaves are rotated by a certain angle, the so-called golden angle 137.5 degrees. In such cases, the 13th leaf is close to the 5th. See Figure 2.
Figure 2. The plant.
It is also interesting that the numbers 12, 5, 13 form a Pythagorean triple. If we go clockwise, starting with the number 4 to 9, we get 4, 1, 1, 6, 1, 8, 13, 5, 1, 2, 7, 2, 9 equal sign 3, 1, 4, 4, 9, 6, 0. As we can see, we are already very close to the number. Unfortunately, somehow the number 9 in the result disturbs the harmony. It seems that something is missing, but I am not sure what it is. Regarding the experimental confirmation of this result, it can be said with certainty that the first 5 digits 3.1446 are correct. However, what follows after 6 remains unknown, as there are no more accurate measurements than those made by Harry Lear in 2019. Even these circumference measurements are not sufficiently precise to be considered scientific fact. There are also other notable similarities, such as the duration of the entire universe currently expanding, which will be followed by a contraction phase, which will take just as long. 311,040,000,000 years. Surprisingly, this number is strongly reminiscent of the circular number. To determine the duration of the expansion phase of the universe, we take half of this total number. The result is then 155,520,000,000 years. As we can see, we again get a harmonic sequence of numbers 1, 5, 2, which suggests that the entire lifetime of the universe is also based on musical principles. The number 152.5 also plays an important role in the calculation of the 280 elements, of which only 118 are currently known. See Contact Report number 228. All this shows us again that nature holds more wisdom than we suspected. It has also shown that our scientific logic is not the non plus ultra, and that in fact everything goes further and deeper. But how could it be otherwise? If we take a closer look at our science, we find that it is based on the principle of division. Instead of uniting things, we divide them, which seems to make little sense in view of the fact that everything we see has emerged from spiritual note. Creation energy, and will eventually become that energy again when the universe contracts. Certainly, from a materialistic point of view, one can separate things and see them as independent to a certain extent, but eventually the point will come when this logic no longer works. After that, we are forced to look for new ways and change our ways of thinking. Finally, I would like to quote a passage from Contact Report 836 that I particularly like. If the history of vibrations and sounds, and thus of music, is fathomed, then its original form can be recognized in the creation existence of all things, to which end it can be said that practically everything and anything has arisen from the ground of origin in a vibrational melodic state, and has remained constant in might.
What do you say to that?
Very interesting and well written. It should be food for thought for anyone reading this because it really is for that of value. The author of the article has effectively put deep thought into these things. It is really worth reading and thinking about.
Good, thank you. About that, I think about your assessment. The man will be really happy. Now, however, I think it's time for me to move on to your questions because...
Yes, but I will come back here in the afternoon as well as tomorrow. Consequently, we can talk in peace.
Yes, if that is so, then we have time enough. Nevertheless, I want to start right away.